We're moving into chapter 9 now, from backwards from chapter 10. What we'll be looking at is solving equations. Hey, we've done this before, but now they're going to contain a squared term. And back in October we were solving equations with x, but now we'll see like an x squared, for example. So there's a couple of ways to do it, and today we're going to focus on one specific method. But before we talk about that method for solving, what's going to help us with today's method is to remember some of the perfect squares. So like 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9. 9, 4, and 1 are perfect squares. What's nice about those is if we want to square root those numbers, we get a nice integer number. You could think of it as, if I give you 9 sugar cubes, could you make a square out of it? Yeah, I could make a square. It would be 3 units wide and 3 units high. That is a square. If I gave you 12 sugar cubes, could you actually make a square out of that without breaking apart the cubes or stacking them up, just making it one flush, 1 unit high square? No, it'd be like a 3 by 4. You can't actually get the two sides to be the same, so it's not a square. These are perfect squares. Other numbers, other amounts of sugar cubes that I could give you to make a perfect square or to make a square out of would be like 16, because that's 4 squared. And 5 squared is 25, 6 squared is 36. These are all perfect squares. The square root of them is a nice, neat integer. Don't think I missed any on the way up to 12. Of course, we keep going. 13 squared, 14 squared, etc. So, what is the square root? So, for example, if b squared equals a, then b is the square root of a. So if 6 squared equals 36, oh, there was a typo on here, then 6 and negative 6 are the square roots, because 6 squared is 36 and negative 6 squared is 36. And then, can square roots be positive and negative? Question mark? Yes. In all but one situation, there will be a positive and negative solution. You can use a plus or minus sign. That's what that's called right there. You read it as plus or minus. Plus or minus to express both answers. So like when we ask what the square root of 36 is, we get 6 and negative 6. We could say plus or minus 6. Just like that. This is our quick, easy answer right here. There is one situation where you only get one square root. That's the square root of 0. That's 0. So we really don't have that plus or minus situation that we need to handle there at all. So give all the answers to the following. That's supposed to trigger the idea that, oh, I'm going to have more than one answer perhaps. And yeah, while you think it's 9, that's good. That's one of the answers. So is negative 9. And here we get plus or minus 14. Square root of 25. Hey, 25 is a perfect square, so we get plus or minus 5. Here, the square root of 20, now notice 20 is not a perfect square, so you have to use your calculator. And you get 4.47. We're going to round to the nearest 2 decimal places when we get a decimal value. Make sure you round correctly, so look at that third place value or the thousandths place value, so you round up or down correctly. But even though it's a decimal and it's approximately, when you go from an equal sign that's saying it is, 2 wavy signs mean approximately. Now while it's approximately 4.47, it's also approximately negative 4.47. Excuse me, so we still use that plus or minus. Alright, so how is this going to help us? We kind of took a side tangent there. Well, for solving quadratic equations that look like this, notice before we were just factoring things like this. Quadratic equations. If we have a quadratic equation but there's no bx term, there's no middle term, then we can solve it, just like we've been solving equations by undoing PEMDAS. Now, to undo the exponent or the x squared, we're going to square root. We undo it with square rooting. Let's give it a shot. So solve the equation, be sure to state all the answers. So here, what's being done to x? It's being squared. So we'll square root it. So x equals 4, but it's plus or minus 4. Make sure we solve these things or undo these things that are being done to x from the bottom up on PEMDAS. So we have to undo addition and subtraction first, which there is none. Next we have to undo multiplication or division. So we'll divide by -2. And we get x squared equals 25. So now we just square root that. So x equals plus or minus 5. Here, there's some subtraction we'll undo first by adding 4. So then we get 3x squared equals 27. Next, undo multiplication and division. And then last but not least, undo squaring by square rooting. So the square root of x squared, again the squaring and the square rooting just cancel each other out or undo each other. They're inverses, and then we get plus or minus 3. Undo addition or subtraction first. So we get 2x squared equals 16. Undo multiplication next. So we get x squared equals 8. So what is x? Square root. So we get x equals, then you'll have to use your calculator here to square root 8. On my calculator, I get 2.828427.125, etc., etc. I just want the first 2 decimal places. So because the number after the place that I am running to is higher than 4, or you also hear that as 5 or higher, we're going to round that up to 2.83. Boom. Here x is getting squared, but first I have to undo multiplication. It's getting multiplied by 1/3. So multiplied by the reciprocal, 3/1, 3/1. We get x squared equals 81. So last but not least, square root, x equals plus or minus 9. Last one. So this one's kind of tricky. Yeah, x is being subtracted, but it's in parentheses. So really, think of that -2 as being up here. It's the last thing we'll undo. We have some squaring, and we have some multiplying. It's getting multiplied by 4. So we need to undo multiplication first by dividing by 4. So we get x minus 2 in parentheses squared equals 6. Then we undo squaring by square rooting. Now I'm going to actually leave this exact for a little while. So I have x minus 2 equals, remember that square rooting makes a plus or minus square root of 6. And then last but not least, undo subtracting now by adding 2. So our final answer is going to be x equals a positive 2 plus or minus the square root of 6. There is our 2 answers. I can take 2 plus the square root of 6, and that's one answer, solution, and 2 minus 6. 2 minus the square root of 6 gives me the other solution. Bada bing, bada boom. There's our exact answer.